Hello everybody, my name is Rainer and this is Rainier Books. This is my channel, it's April the 30th and I won't finish a book today, so I want to give you the wrap-up of April 2023, a great reading month for myself. I have finished 10 books, which is incredible for my usual reading, and I must say that starting listening to audiobooks on a regular basis has really increased the numbers of my reading, and I absolutely do enjoy it. So let's talk about the 10 books that I finished. This month has been dominated by the long list of the Women's Prize, and some titles you will recognize are on the long list and some even on the short list of the Women's Prize. Let's go. The first book I finished in April was Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, shortlisted now for the Women's Prize. It is a masterpiece. People rave about it on BookTube, and full deservedly so. Barbara Kingsolver has sort of done a remake, if you want, of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. She has transferred the story of David Copperfield from the 19th century in England to the 21st century in Appalachia, in Virginia, in Lee County in the United States. And she has done a lot of similar and parallel things that appear in David Copperfield, but you don't have to read David Copperfield in order to enjoy Demon Copperhead. It's a gripping novel, it's a fantastic novel. It is probably the huge favorite of winning the Women's Prize. A rich description of this young boy who grows up in a trailer in Lee County, Virginia, in Appalachia, and whose surrounding and his own life is sort of, can be described by poverty and drugs and hopelessness in a way. But he is a survivor, and we know that from the very beginning because he is an eye narrator, which tells us that he will survive the story. Demon Copperhead. It is a novel of 546 pages, so it takes a while to read this, but it's absolutely worthwhile and one of the most powerful books of the year. I had really luck in April. April 23, wow, was a great reading month. Because the next book I have to talk about is another book that I really loved, that I really enjoyed, and that I would ask you, and not ask you, but I would advise you, I would recommend it to you. And this goes to England, so I try to change my accent a little bit. I can't speak Brummie. I should do it actually, because this is Birmingham, and this is Bournville by Jonathan Coe. Absolutely one of my favorite writers right now. He has written several books that I have read now. Like, I started his work with Mr. Wilder and Me, I continued with Middle England last year, and now I read Bournville, which again shows him as a chronicler, as somebody who is looking at the history of Britain and England in focus probably, and he shows us the history of this country, the former empire that has done Brexit, that has sort of drifted away from Europe in recent years. He does that here in this book by 8 occasions, spanning over 3 or 4 generations of the Lamb family in Birmingham that is connected to the Cadbury chocolate factory, which is one of Britain's and England's most beloved companies, because British chocolate, English chocolate is Cadbury, and this chocolate that was not recognized, this chocolate by the European Union, which led to big disappointment and anger in England. And the Lamb family, he can describe family relationships and of course also our own lives, which are deeply connected to the history of our country, of our region, of the world. This is, I think, Jonathan Coe's great art of connecting us and families that he creates to the history in which we live in. Jonathan Coe, Bournville, absolutely recommended here. Trespasses is a book that is now shortlisted for the Women's Prize, written by Louise Kennedy from Northern Ireland. It is a story that plays in Belfast and the outskirts of Belfast, where we meet Cushla, a young Catholic woman and her family. She is a teacher, but she also works in the family pub sometimes. And she meets and falls in love with a guy named Michael, who is much years her senior, about 15 years. And he is a Protestant. He's a very charismatic person. They fall in love with each other. This novel is very slow. It describes the atmosphere of Northern Ireland, of Belfast in the 1970s, I think in a very good way, so that we can almost be there. But it's very slow. And I had my issues with this because then in the end of the novel, the last 50, 60 pages, it develops an enormous pace. But some readers might get lost in the long start, if you need such a long start before things. It is justifiable that she does this because she sort of gets us into the atmosphere. But I didn't like it as much as many other booktubers do. So take a look at Trespasses by Louise Kennedy if you're interested in the Troubles and the Civil War in Northern Ireland in the 1970s. The fourth book was by Gabino Iglesias, an American writer who was nominated for the Edgar, for the Mystery Writers of America, for the best novel of 2023. He did not win it. The prize was announced 3 days ago, and it went to Notes on an Execution, the only book actually of the Edgar list that I haven't touched. I DNF'd one. I read 3 of the shortlist of the nominees, but I haven't got to Notes on an Execution because there's a queue in the library and it's still on my list and I will read it. So that is The Devil Takes You Home, which is a novel. Tell me about The Devil Takes You Home. It is a story about a young Hispanic American, and he is living with his family, a normal family life until his child gets sick of leukemia and he needs a lot of money to pay for medical treatment, but then his child dies. But he has started Breaking Bad. So it's a little Breaking Bad story because this guy Mario, who is the protagonist of the book, he is Breaking Bad and he tries to make money in order to save the life of his child, which is in vain. Child dies, even the marriage falls apart, but Mario continues on the bad part, on the bad side, on the illegal path of life. So he goes to Mexico together with a cartel member and together with another American guy, and they are supposed to snatch millions of dollars from one of the other cartels. There's a lot of violence in this book. It's very violent at times. It is also supernatural, where we have horror elements. That's why they sort of compared the book on the blurb with Stephen King and Breaking Bad, some kind of mixture. And I really was a little appalled by the violence. I know that there's tough violence out there, but you don't have to describe it in detail, I guess, and I think. And I was also not so fascinated by the supernatural things. There are beings, I would say, in that book, especially in tunnels that are that have been digged between the US and Mexico. The Shards, oh yeah, number 5 was The Shards, my first Bret Easton Ellis book. I absolutely loved it. It is the new book by Bret Easton Ellis, his first novel in 13 years. And this is the story of, it's autofiction, the story of a young guy going on a high school, a very rich high school in Los Angeles called Buckley High. His name is Bret Ellis, and he is 17 years old. Everybody is rich in this book, and he's writing or reminiscing the summer now as an older man in his 50s. He's looking back at the time in the 1980s when he had this beautiful companionship with his classmates, all of them driving wonderful cars and stuff like that and having their beautiful lives. But then things changed in the summer of 1981, he says, and the things change because a new guy comes into school. His name is Robert Mallory, and there's also a serial killer who is starting to do his bloody work. He is called the Trawler by the media. And these two things, the summer is the summer of growing up. It's the summer of also fully discovering that he's more gay than heterosexual. the narrator, and there are similarities, of course, to the life of Bret Ellis, but this is totally Bret Easton Ellis, the author, but it's totally fiction. And it's a very unreliable narrator, which I also liked in a way, because I understood after a while that we can't trust a single word, actually, that Bret Ellis is telling about this summer of 1981. Yeah, it was very, and it has a beautiful soundtrack, and there's a list on Spotify about each band, each singer who is named in the Shards, and you absolutely should listen to the music if you love 1980s music. Yeah, Life Ceremony by Sayaka Murata was my next reading experience. It is a collection of the great Japanese author who became a world bestseller with her first novel that was translated, Convenience Store Woman. Now she's here, she's out with this collection of short stories that came out last year. Life Ceremony by Sayaka Murata. It's about body horror in a way. She tells us in these stories very strange and weird and creepy things about our bodies, and you really have to be able to tolerate this, because otherwise I would advise you not to read this. It's about using the human body after we leave this earth in every possible way. In one story, in the Life Ceremony title story, we have, for example, what formerly was a funeral is in this book, in Life Ceremony, a ceremony where the body of the deceased is sort of prepared as food for the mourning people, and at the same time they have life ceremonies, which means that they try to produce new life whenever an old life is, or a deceased life is being eaten. So this is really difficult to read at times. I was really, I had difficulties, but I was really thinking, oh my god, this is like, not so, that's so easy. But it was interesting, and I thought also it was funny because she plays with taboos and with all those thoughts. And it is another book in the Japanese tradition of the surreal, which is also funny, which I have found with Yoko Ogawa and Banana Yoshimoto, for example. The next book I picked up was this one, which I absolutely loved. I would say this is a 5-star read. It's Fire Rush by Jacqueline Crooks. It is shortlisted for the Women's Prize in 2023. Absolute must read. And again, like in the Shards, we have a lot of music in this book, and I recommend the playlist that the author herself, Jacqueline, has put out on Spotify. A lot of dub and reggae music. Do you want to hear more spongy reggae? Say yeah, yeah. This brought me actually to go back to the time when I grew up, because Jacqueline and I, we are almost, I think, of the same age. And this brought me back to the time she was dancing as the protagonist of this book a lot in a London club called The Crypt, which is fictitious. But I remember my first encounters with Jamaican music were in the end of the 1970s and early 1980s, and I found back to a great band, Black Uhuru, which is one of the greatest bands of reggae music. And here's a lot about dub, which is an offspring of reggae music, where you extract the vocals from reggae songs and put your own vocals in live sessions mostly onto that songs, and that's what we find here in Fire Crash, which also is a novel of female liberation. It's a story of a strong female character, Yemei, who falls in love with a guy called Mbue, and then she falls into dependence with a very abusive guy. She has to liberate herself. She goes back to her roots, goes back to Jamaica, to cockpit country, and the whole novel is written in a very musical style, also sometimes in Jamaican patois, which is, after a while, good to understand. And I heard that the audiobook is amazingly good. So Fire Rush, I love it, and I want to win it, the Women's Prize in 2023, because of its uniqueness. The next book I read was a non-fiction one, and that was Revanche, a German one by Michael Thumann. He lives in Moscow, and he has worked for 25 years reporting on Eastern Europe, and in this book he sort of summarizes the development that Russia has made under Vladimir Putin to the most threatening political power in the world. And this gives an answer to a lot of people. I actually saw yesterday a very disturbing video on YouTube where Oliver Stone, the American Oscar Academy Award winner, 3 times Academy Award winner, speaks about the war in Ukraine, and I was really appalled by this. I almost wanted to throw something into the TV. No, I didn't do it, and I didn't want to do it, but I was getting angry when I heard how Oliver Stone described Putin, who he has made a documentary about several years ago. He met the guy in several interviews, and how much he is romanticizing Putin and how much he is explaining how Russia had to invade Ukraine. He doesn't mention raped women, he doesn't mention killed children and killed civilians at all, and this is something that really disturbs me. So read this book if you understand German. I think it will not be translated into other languages, unfortunately. It is a good summary of how Russia became what it is today within the last 25-30 years. I fall back to the shelves because I have to read from my shelves more, and I'm very happy that I actually finished 6 books this month that were and are on my shelves. This is a beautiful book. I loved it. I fell in love with it almost after like 30, 40, 50 pages. Behold the Dreamers by Mbue from the United States. Imbolo is actually from Cameroon, from a city called Mbue. I will make a single review about this book. I haven't made it yet. And this is about a couple from Cameroon, from Mbue, going to the United States, trying to find a better life for them, but most primarily for their children. And they meet a lot of problems, and like lots of immigrants meet, and racism and poverty as well in the new country, in the US, and also an immigration system that is very inhumane. And also we meet a Wall Street family. The guy who Jinde, the male protagonist, works for is a Wall Street manager, kind of a nice guy actually. His name is Mr. Edwards, and the relationship also between the Edwards family and Jinde's family is described in this book. Hollywood rights are sold, but I think the movie hasn't been made yet for Imbolo Mbue's wonderful novel Behold the Dreamers, which is the second novel that I read by Imbolo. Imbolo has debuted with this one, but she also wrote How Beautiful We Were, which I absolutely loved. So a favorite author is she as well, probably, and I'm waiting for her third novel to come. And the last one, last but not least, I finished it yesterday. I actually didn't want to read it, but then I thought, okay, let's give it a try because I had it on audio. And this is Cecile, Wandering Souls, and I'm so happy. Thank you, Women's Prize, for suggesting us such interesting books that we otherwise, at least I otherwise would not find in the jungle, in this huge amount of books that are published each and every day, each and every week. So Cecile Pin's novel Wandering Souls, which also I will make a single review about, is about a Vietnamese family. It's another immigration story, a Vietnamese family. It's in the 1970s, and there are parallels to Fire Rush by Jacqueline Crooks because it's the same period of time. Even parallels to the Shards by Bret, Easton, Ellis, because it's that time we speak about, these late 70s, the early 80s. This book, Wandering Souls, a family of 2 adults and 7 children are fleeing Vietnam and the aftermath of the Vietnam War and the dictatorial regime that stood in Vietnam, and they are one of the boat people, and there's a tragedy on the sea. The parents and 4 of the siblings die at sea, and only a girl and her 2 brothers make it to Hong Kong. And their life in Hong Kong and the refugee camp and also in London is depicted in this book. It's so beautifully written. It's very short, only 6 hours in my case as an audiobook. It is told from several perspectives of people, and everything is really crafted very well. So there's nothing, even a ghost. Usually I don't like ghosts in books, but here we have a ghost. There's one of the children, the brothers and sister, a brother that has died in the sea. He is also narrating a part of the story as a dead person when he looks at his siblings and back to his own short life. So these were the 10 books I read. A lot of beautiful readings that I had. I had a great reading month in 2023. Thanks to the Women's Prize for suggesting us these books. Fire Rush I wouldn't have discovered without you guys there. So how was your reading month? Tell me everything down below. I will hopefully make a TBR video because I want to work on TBRs more even today and publish it a little bit later. So thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you liked what you saw, and bye.